Helen, thank you. We will see you then. Now, we're going to return to this issue around the next steps in relation to fighting terrorism, this national security debate around whether the Immigration Minister should have the power to remove the citizenship of any dual nationals involved in terrorism, or indeed those who aren't dual nationals but can apply for citizenship elsewhere. With me now, Labor's Michael Danby, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Good to be with you, David.
So, Bill Shorten today has said, in principle, this is a sensible step, at least in relation to dual nationals. Do you agree, and why are you now satisfied?
Well, the opposition doesn't sign blank cheques. We haven't seen the legislation, but who could doubt us after the three tranches of previous national security legislation that Labor will do the right thing? I think it's playing politics, especially after that big division in Cabinet, which has been on the front pages. You know, we're always going to make sure that the Australian people is safe. Who would think that Her Majesty's loyal opposition is not going to be with a vast majority of the Australian people and see that they're safe?
All right, well, you spent the last week, however, saying you wanted to see the detail. You're up for a conversation. Now, today, you've agreed that it is a sensible move. So something's happened overnight.
Well, I don't think anything's happened overnight. Labor has always been in favour of the safety of the Australian people, and I think the Prime Minister has been playing politics to say that something has changed overnight.
Well, you have gone from saying you want to discuss it to saying you will support it.
Well, we'll support it, but we have to see the detail. I mean, no one signs...
But you weren't saying that yesterday, is the point.
OK, but no one signs blank cheques, David. We will, however, make sure that there is no tranche or no group of terrorists who can sneak through, who are not covered by the legislation, or the kinds of work that needs to be done to prevent them affecting Australians.
I don't want to be picky here, but saying you'll support it, subject to the detail, is not what you were saying all week. So something's happened. Is it the political pressure?
It's not the political pressure, it's always what Labor intended. Look, I'll tell you something else, it'll have to go back to the Intelligence Committee, because they always find glitches in this kind of legislation. Anthony Byrne, you've had him on the show many times. He, Mark Dreyfus, Bill Shorten, all of these people. Does anyone really doubt that Labor is determined as the government to make sure that there are no major mass casualty attacks in Australia?
Nonetheless, this is a significant power being given to a politician, the Immigration Minister, to revoke someone's citizenship, their right to be an Australian. So we are talking about a serious step here. You wouldn't be more comfortable having a judicial process here?
Well, again, the government may end up bringing that forward. Who knows? I mean, that's probably
what your view is. I mean, you've thought a lot about these things.
Well, you know, perhaps we would prefer these kind of things. But let's see what Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop twist the Prime Minister's arms into doing. You know, George Brandis and Barnaby Joyce are on that side of things too, David.
But in your mind, I mean, as I say, you've thought a lot about these national security issues over many years. Is it better to have some judicial role involved when you're taking away someone's citizenship?
Ultimately, it might be. But, you know, I don't know what legislation the government is proffering. We don't sign blank cheques, but I'm very pleased that Julie Bishop has stood up today and really gone after that. I think he might be a Cambodian Australian dual national.
Prakash.
Yeah, Prakash, the Daesh terrorist. The thing I'd like her to do, though, is to make sure that this applies to all terrorists, including the Australian-Lebanese dual citizen who was involved in the terrorist attack in Bulgaria, who's a Hezbollah terrorist. And that casts some shadow over this intelligence sharing arrangement she's been talking about with Iran. We don't know much about that. The opposition would also like to know, you know, that we're being consistent with all dual citizens, and that we are not getting into some arrangement with the Iranians because of you know, optimism about the nuclear deal.
Well, this is an interesting point you raised there. Are you concerned that the focus on fighting ISIL and the need to, at some level, cooperate with Iran is causing problems?
Well, I don't know the extent of the Foreign Minister's intelligence sharing arrangement. If it's something to do with asylum seekers, I'd like to know the details of that too. You know, as they say, where's the beef? Has this been discussed with the public? What are the details of this arrangement? cannot believe that the government would change any arrangements regarding Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed terrorist organisation, which is classified by the Australian Parliament as a terrorist organisation. I'm sure Julie Bishop will apply the law equally to the dual citizen who's hiding in Lebanon, who killed tourists in Bulgaria, and who works for the Iranian-funded and supported Hezbollah.
The comments she's made this week about Iran needing to be in the tent in relation to the military and political strategy in Iraq, are you comfortable with that?
I'm not. I think the French Foreign Minister, who's also a socialist, has said that he wonders if the verification arrangements on the nuclear deal are strong enough. He says that they must be verified before France will sign on to these arrangements. So, you know, I didn't know, and I didn't know the Abbott cabinet had agreed to military cooperation in the field with Iran. I mean, previously we were at their throats with independent autonomous sanctions against Iran. How can we suddenly be cooperating with them? Does this involve the Australian Air Force giving, you know, coordinates of what it's bombing to Hezbollah? I would hope not.
Nonetheless, what needs to happen in Iraq, do you think? Because the fall of Ramadi has raised a lot of questions about whether the current strategy is working.
All serious people need to review this, and I think people like Mr Kilcullen and others have been saying that we need to you know, have a more serious military involvement. I don't want our people, our SAS trainers and that kind of stuff to be jeopardised. If you look at the map, David, they're surrounded on 3 sides by IS. I know they've got orders that they're allowed to fight to protect themselves, but how this works out is not how it's doing it at the moment. And one of the things that's really silly is for those who've got sort of blind optimism about Iran to be encouraging Iranian militias under their virtual viceroy, General Soleimani, to be fighting in western Iraq, because that is the very thing that will alienate the Sunni tribes there.
And that's exactly what the Iraqi Prime Minister called on as Ramadi was falling, for the Iranian-backed Shia militia to go in. David Kilcullen, you mentioned, he says the West needs to have ground controllers in there coordinating the airstrikes. That's the next step that's needed here. Is he right?
Well, again, the opposition needs to see a plan from the government. I'm sure no opposition, no government in Australia, no other Western country would like to see the fall of Baghdad. And, you know, we have to do everything that is reasonable. I don't think anyone wants to have major military involvement in Iraq again, but discussions about other tweaking of what we're doing is something, you know, the government come up with a plan. Let's hear it from the Defence Minister, and we'll have to look at it.
Let me ask you about China briefly. The South China Sea and the regional tensions there. The government, the Australian government, has made it clear that, well, the Prime Minister's words today, we deplore any unilateral moves on this disputed territory. It needs to be dealt with through the international processes. What do you believe Australia needs to do?
Well, Opposition Defence spokesman Senator Conroy said very clearly that Australia should continue to fly and sail through internationally recognised waters. It's problematic because there are these 12-mile exclusion zones around these newly built islands, but 50% of international maritime trade, valued at $5.3 trillion, including 60% of Australian trade goes through that area. And to have an area that goes right along the coasts of Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam and the Philippines and excludes everyone from that area is a problem for Australia. We don't want it. We want the Chinese not to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. They're a rising power. We recognise their importance in the world. They're doing economically very well. Don't make a fight. Do what you did with the Japanese, Beijing. Back off and just let's continue trading and working with each other.
All right, Michael Danby, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now we